why pilots still say Roger, Mayday, and use the NATO alphabet here is a strange moment that happens the first time someone listens to real aviation radio. You expect pilots to sound like characters from a movie, crisp and dramatic, maybe even heroic, but instead, you hear things that sound old, almost antique. Words like Roger, phrases like Mayday, and a strange alphabet made of words like Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, and Delta. It sounds like a language frozen in time. But behind this odd vocabulary is a story of survival, miscommunication, global coordination, and the slow evolution of aviation from a chaotic frontier into one of the safest systems in human history. Today, we're not just talking about aviation phrases, we're exploring why these words never disappeared, why pilots in the 1920s, 1950s, and even today in the era of satellite navigation, glass cockpits, autopilot, and AI still say them, and why these simple, old-fashioned expressions may remain in the cockpit long after the aircraft themselves become fully autonomous. This is the real story behind Roger, Mayday, and the NATO alphabet. The story begins in the earliest days of radio. The skies were still new territory. Pilots flew open cockpit airplanes made of wood and fabric. The engines were loud, the wind was even louder, and radio technology was primitive. Communication was fragile. Words got swallowed by static. Whole sentences would vanish into the noise. A single unclear message could mean the difference between a safe landing and a fatal crash. Before pilots used headsets, they held microphones to their mouths with one hand while flying with the other. Radios were scratchy, unstable, and often unreliable. In this environment, language had to be simple, predictable, and nearly impossible to misunderstand. This is why Roger exists. Roger is not a name. It is not slang, and it doesn't mean yes, it means one thing: I have received your message. That's it. But why Roger? Why not received, copy, or confirmed? In the early 20th century, aviation communication wasn't international yet. Pilots mostly spoke English, but radio operators came from many countries, and at that time, radio procedures used the letters of the alphabet to represent words. An early version of what eventually became phonetic alphabets. For the letter R, the word chosen was Roger.yr because R stood for received. If someone said Roger, it wasn't casual. It meant the radio transmission reached me. I heard you clearly enough to understand. Nothing more. Nothing less. Later, in the 1950s, the phonetic alphabet changed. Roger was replaced by Romeo. But pilots kept saying Roger anyway because by then the meaning was universal. It was tradition, standardization, and clarity. Even when the alphabet evolved, the word Roger had already become part of aviation DNA. And this brings us to Mayday. Mayday is one of those phrases everyone has heard, yet very few people know where it came from. It sounds English, but it isn't. It actually comes from the French phrase Mayday, which means help me. In the early 1920s, a British radio officer named Frederick Stanley Mockford was asked to come up with a word pilots could use to signal emergencies. It needed to be fast, emotional, unmistakable, and easy to hear through static-heavy radios. Mockford worked at Croydon Airport in London, but many flights at the time were traveling between London and Paris. Pilots and controllers spoke both English and French, so he borrowed from the French expression Mayday. Over time, the pronunciation shifted just slightly, becoming Mayday. The brilliance of Mayday is that it carries urgency even when distorted by noise. Shouting help or emergency over a radio crackling with interference could be misunderstood. But Mayday was punchy, unique, and hard to mishear. The rules were strict. Saying it once could be overlooked. Saying it twice might be mistaken. But saying Mayday 3 times in a row created a pattern strong enough to pierce through static. Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. This triple call became an international standard. But emergencies come in different levels, and not everything is a life or death situation. That's where pan comes from. It means urgent, but not deadly. It might be a mechanical issue, an ill passenger, or a situation requiring priority handling. But unlike Mayday, it does not indicate immediate danger to life or the Aircraft.pan also has French roots from the word pan, meaning breakdown or failure. It became another tool in the system of international radio communication. All these words share something in common: simplicity, clarity, and resistance to distortion. But nothing symbolizes aviation communication more than the NATO alphabet. Words like Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, something almost everyone has heard, even outside of aviation. But most people don't know why pilots use it or how it was designed. Before the NATO alphabet existed, countries created their own phonetic alphabets. The British had one, the Americans had another, the Germans had theirs, the French had theirs, and none of them matched. This caused enormous confusion in World War II. Allied pilots flying together would sometimes misunderstand each other's radio calls. A British pilot might say A for apple, while an American said able. Meanwhile, another pilot might call it affirm. In stressful, chaotic environments, even simple letters became dangerous. The problem got worse after World War II, when civilian air travel rapidly expanded. Flights were crossing borders, crossing oceans, and using the same airports. Controllers in one country had to speak with pilots from dozens of other nations. Accents varied, microphone quality varied, signal strength varied, but aviation requires precision. A single letter misheard could send two planes into the same airspace. This is why the NATO phonetic alphabet was created in 1956. It wasn't chosen at random. Every word in the alphabet was tested, studied, and evaluated using massive amounts of data. The creators tested each word with hundreds of speakers from many nations, each speaking English with their own accents. They used noisy radios, long distances, and stressful conditions. They asked one question: which word survived distortion the best? The results became what we know today: Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo, Foxtrot, and so on. But here's the surprising part. Many earlier phonetic alphabets used powerful, heroic words like able, Baker, Charlie. But these didn't perform consistently around the world. A word might sound clear in New York, but confusing in Tokyo. Another might sound good in London, but be easily distorted in Cairo. So the NATO alphabet chose words based on global clarity, not cultural familiarity. Even today, no other system has proven more reliable. But this raises the big question: why do pilots still use these old terms? In the era of modern digital communication, the answer lies in the nature of aviation. Airplanes operate in a high-risk environment where time, clarity, and consistency matter more than convenience or modernization. Even with GPS, radar, satellites, and advanced avionics, aviation still depends on radio communication as a primary backup system. Why? Because radios rarely fail completely. Even when systems crash, electricity fails, or navigation equipment breaks, a simple radio can still work. And when it works, the words need to be universal. They need to be ancient, predictable, and unmistakable. There's also another reason: psychology. In emergencies, human performance becomes fragile. Heart rate increases, breathing speeds up, fine motor skills decrease, thinking becomes narrow. And under high stress, people naturally revert to training simple, repetitive actions ingrained over time. Roger and Mayday work because they are short and embedded deeply into the muscle memory of aviation training. A pilot in distress might forget a checklist. They might forget the frequency, but they will never forget Mayday. Another reason these words persist is misunderstanding. Many beginners think aviation communication should be like normal conversation, but that's not the goal. Aviation radio is not about personality or style. It is about standardization. This structure prevents confusion. It avoids assumptions. It offers no room for interpretation. For example, the word affirmative is used instead of yes, and the word negative replaces no. Why? Because the word no can easily sound like go on a noisy frequency, and the word yes, especially spoken with an accent, might be swallowed by static. So aviation removes the risk entirely by choosing precise alternatives. This brings us to another reason pilots use standardized phrases: the human voice. Even today, With aircraft full of digital systems, automated warnings, and computer-driven instruments, the human voice remains the most flexible communication tool. It can respond instantly, it can clarify misunderstandings, it can express emotion or urgency, and unlike computers, it doesn't freeze, restart, or disconnect due to software bugs. Human communication is the most reliable redundancy in aviation, but there is another deeper reason these words survived. Aviation is global. When a pilot in Brazil speaks to a controller in Japan, they need a language system that works regardless of nationality. When a Russian cargo pilot talks to a controller in the United States, they must share a vocabulary. When a pilot from Turkey flies into France, they need instructions that are instantly recognizable. Roger works the same in every country. Mayday is recognized in every language. The NATO alphabet is understood across every continent. I hope you guys better understand from start to end. That's for today's video. Click subscribe to the Giggle Haven, where we explain everything in a simple and easy way. Take care. Bye.